is the first exhibit in this handsome gallery. It's terrific. And thank you for being here. I see a lot of familiar faces. I have a niece here that's come in from Arizona. Where are you?
I'm right here. Right here.
There she is. That's Sally from Arizona. Well, I'm sitting under that name there. They've thought of everything. I was wondering if they had a cot upstairs for a little nap. Well, listen, I'm going to talk to you. This is a conversation that we're going to have. You know, I'm going to suggest some ideas, and I'm praying that you will interrupt me and ask about paintings and art and all kinds of other things, if you've got the will to do that. But let me start by saying that about 2 years ago, I was in the giant food store. Excuse me, my allergies are kicking in. And an old friend of mine shouted at me across the aisle. It was Enrique Martinez Vidal. And he asked me what I was doing. And I said, in jest, that I was fulfilling my destiny. And I kind of laughed at having said that, and he took it very seriously. And he said, you know, that's very important. And that's, you know, I thought, yeah, he's right. So Enrique had his finger on the pulse here. I am committed to working as an artist, living a creative life until the bitter end. These are moments along the way. These are the memories that I see facing me here. You know, I can recall practically everything that was happening at the time that I was making these paintings. Not everything, but almost everything. So what's happening in my creative life? Well, I am manipulating a language. Art is language. It's got its own vocabulary. It's got its own syntax. It's got its own alphabet, all wrapped up in what are called the expressive elements of visual expression. These elements are line and light and color and texture and space, and then something called form. But the way that I use the word form, it means how to connect the imagery together so that we end up with something that's coherent, that it's not, and here's one of my favorite phrases, it's not visual gobbledygook. It's got order. Art is order for me. If you don't have order, then you're dealing with something therapeutic, but it's not art like I pretend to be making. These expressive elements, and here's where, you know, I'm going to describe these expressive elements as I use them, and then as you later walk around, take a look and see if I have fulfilled my aim to make these imagery coherent, that you understand what's happening in these paintings. Now, there's a catch in all of this. You know, there's an element of poetry in me, and I leave things out so that I'm not spelling everything out completely. There's an element of mystery. That is to say, you look at this and you identify the imagery, and then still it's not quite satisfying enough. And I guess you have to provide whatever it is I have left out. I've done it intentionally, but, you know, I'm not always sure what I've ended up with either. You know, I've painted away. I have to keep reminding myself, what am I doing? What am I aiming for? What do I want to say? How am I going to resolve this problem that I've been working on? Painting over in the corner, I worked on for 13 years. I know it's madness. This one I worked on for 2 years. and just finished it about 6 months ago. Looks like it's something out of the 15th century. But you'll notice that the heavy paint is a consequence of all the effort that I made to pull it off. At the very end, when I think I've completed something, I get a little rush of pleasure. Then it goes away, and I start something else. Well, these expressive elements have what I like to call infinite flexibility. Anybody who wants to manipulate them can do it, and can insert their own personality in it. I'll start with the one that I don't think I'm using much at all. It's called, the line. Line is an expressive element. Excuse me, not while I wipe my nose. If I were an artist who worked with line as the major expressive element, you'd see sharp edges along the figure's edge. You'll notice here that these are mostly soft edges. So linearity is not there. My figures aren't slender. They're not like a narrow tree or a wire on the ceiling or anything like that. So linearity is not my expressive tool. Light, maybe. There's some suggestion of light coming in from the left-hand side, and you notice the shadows are on the right-hand side. But it's not Rembrandt, He makes you feel like there's a spotlight on the imagery. My light source is more of an inner light. I do a lot of glazing, painting behind right here called Getting Out. You'll notice there's a brilliant orange on the left-hand side there, and that's a consequence of putting red over yellow. And that gives you this luminosity. So some light, perhaps, but it's not the major expressive element. It's a tool I use, but it's not a big deal. Color is important. And there are a variety of ways you can use it. You can work with the three major colors, red, yellow, and blue. And I don't seem to be doing that. I'll talk to you about the way I manipulate color. So color is important, but it's not. I work tonally. The painting in the corner over there and this one are shades of blue. So color is a way that I establish connections from one part, from this figure to that figure, from that figure down to the table. They're all connected color-wise. So that's a major expressive element for me. We can count that as one. Texture is important too, but it's not. I'm not a realist. You recognize things here, but if I were a realist, texture would be suggesting velvet or flesh or something like that, something just very descriptive. So texture for me is what I call, what I just described, simulated texture. Texture where the artist is making it look like a real texture, real material. Instead, my texture is something called actual texture, and it has to do with the pileup of paint, thick, granular paint that piles up as I labor to make these imagery. Each of these figures, this guy here must have had 10 different versions. His head was tipping down, his head was looking out at me. This reminds me of a useful tool that I've just cooked up. Paper mache, newspaper, and modeling paste that I built up to make it look like my figures, the faces of my figures. So if I want to turn ahead, I don't have to start fooling around, with anatomy and so forth. I'll just do this. That guy like that, and this guy like that, and so on. Really, really helpful. So actual texture is it's called pasto in the art world, it means thick paint. The difficulty with paint that's thick like this is that in various atmospheres, and you'll see it in this red painting around the corner, where the upper right-hand corner shows a little bit of a wrinkle in the canvas. I'll tighten that up eventually. But when that happens, the canvas is swelling and shrinking and moving around, and the paint skin is just staying right where it is. So the surface is loosening. None of that has happened yet, but I'm a little anxious about it over the long haul. You know, I want these things to be around. They are, after all, moments of time where, you know, I've let everybody, or at least the mice in my basement studio, see what my ideas and feelings and perceptions are. That's that's the bottom line here. I'm leaving a record of who I am and what I thought, and how I felt, and what I perceived. Okay, let's see where I am now. Space. Space is an expressive element. When one thinks about space, one thinks about single vantage point perspective, you know, deep penetrating space, illusionistic space. You feel like you can climb into the frame and walk around. That's not me. I tried that. You know, I've tried landscapes. I live in Boiling Springs, and it's a lovely spot, you know. Lots of inspiration out there if you're a landscape artist. But I'm figurative, you know. All my feelings are wrapped up in the human figure. So, when I look at my paintings and I begin to get a sensation that I've got a deep space and how am I going to figure out where these folks stand in all this space, I think, well, something's gone wrong. I'm going to start focusing on the figures. I'm going to bring them forward. They're going to occupy more of the foreground, and I'm not going to worry about deep space. It's just all going to be shallow space. You know, how far back is that doorway? Well, maybe 5 feet. And I've created a window out of which you can see the moon, but you know, I've constricted that a great deal. So space for me is shallow space. It's like a stage. People operating on the front part of the stage. So that's, you know, two-dimensional space could be an important expressive element for me as well. Then form, and this is where we get into the nitty-gritty. This is my major expressive element. This is the means by which I hold everything together. It's the syntax of my visual expression. Syntax is a term used about any language. It's word order, the way you position words in a sentence, and so forth. So as you walk, since form is my major expressive element, with the other ones coming along, you know, helping along the way, I want you to take a look at the paintings and see if I've introduced any structural devices that relate the lower right-hand corner to the upper left-hand corner, or one object to the next object. Let's do a little structural analysis of this one. This is all about arcs, and it's set up by that delicate little crescent moon that we've got up there. Then you'll notice that this is arced. The table edge is arced. The dog's back is arced. The bowl of pea soup is arced. The shoulders are arced. The chair is an arc. There's a big sweeping one coming along here. And then there are vertical structural devices.